why would you say you're a Lacanian and not a Jungian? I mean, this is a huge topic, I know, but just personally, if you could comment on this, like, why do you subscribe to Lacan's ideas and not like the way Jung views the unconscious and archetypes and all that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say that Jung and Lacan um, took a really different direction in how they started from the Freudian unconscious. Uh, Lacan's main criticism or Lacan's elaboration of the Freudian unconscious will be that for him, the Freudian conscious is a myth. Oedipus complex, these are just little stories. And Lacan is interested in what is the paradoxes, what is the underlying problematic that is there. Like, for example, there is no sexual rapport. That's for Lacan the key of the unconscious. Um, so it's like little real problems. That's the key that he's interested in. So a bit away from the narrative of the unconscious. And then you could say that Jung goes the opposite way. Jung goes in the direction of telling the story of human life, telling the story of the human unconscious, the complexity, the multiplicity of what the unconscious is. So Jung goes in that respect in the direction of the imaginary, huh? And Lacan goes in the direction of the real, when both treating the unconscious as a symbolic thing, which I think was what Freud first discerned. So I'm not saying that Jung is an idiot, and I'm not saying that in Jungian analysis that there is it's not relevant. No, I do think that the Jungian myths and Jung's focus on the archetypes, it is saying something, but it's very mythical. And therefore it's very um, probably very colored by time and cultural contexts. And the current way in which Jung, in some context, is being used as universal fits very well in the Western um, imperialist way of imposing a model of the mind.
Phallogocentric, to use a term by
Yeah,
Derrida, Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and it's so it fits very well within a certain imperialistic moral way of thinking. And maybe it's not Jung, it's the way Jung is used. And I have my concerns about it. Uh, and Lacan, on the other hand, it tends to be very abstract and dry. But in the end, I prefer something of that abstraction as as orienting for myself in thinking about the human mind, rather than going into the direction of what might be more ideological. Um,
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first person I spoke to who was a practicing psychoanalyst, she was Jungian, and yeah, I mean, really interesting ideas. But then I couldn't help but in the back of my mind while talking to her, this was years ago, before I even had a podcast. It was just a casual Zoom call. Realize like it just how although like how can you make this kind of like universalistic claim about reality and the cosmos, these archetypes and all that, because as you pointed out, it seems specific to a very particular culture, very, very, very particular point in time. And then if I could ask you this, you said something very interesting there. You said maybe it's not really Jung, maybe how people use Jungian ideas. So like probably the most famous Jungian in the world right now, Jordan Peterson. And as you know, he has like his biblical series and he uses like these biblical stories. And interestingly, what he's trying to do is like try and derive some, you'd call it wisdom or like substantial moral teachings from these and kind of see how you could apply them to your life. But then also through that, he universalizes them into like, this is how reality is. So
mhm.
on along the lines of a conversation, like, okay, I guess I'll ask this in a bipartite manner. Number one, how would you respond to someone doing something like that through myths and stories? And number two, is that also something what a psychotic would do, where they kind of take the fractures of their own life and then they create this new story exactly as to how Jung did, as you point out in his Red Book?
Yeah, yeah. Well, for me, there's a really strong difference between Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung. I think Peterson is really at the level of ideology. He's
Oh, oh,
using
yeah.
he's using Jungian inspiration. He's maybe drawing into biblical texts, but actually, he's very moral. He's like predefining what people should do or what they should not do. So he's giving guidance. So it's ideological because he makes choices and makes claims that these ideas are in some way valid for everybody. Like all men can learn from what he says about masculinity. Um, and it's an idea about what is a good way of being male and a bad way of being a male, or a good way of relating to a woman as a man and a bad way of relating to a woman, or a good way of relating to your mother and a bad way of relating to your mother. So it's prescribing something. It's not that he says you must do that, but it's formulated in such a way that obviously for the reader or for the listener, it becomes clear that there is a superior and an inferior way of dealing with these ideas. And therefore, it is ideological because it's ethical, it's in the field of good and bad, and it's making a choice for other people. It's prescribing something. So therefore, it's ideological. I don't think Jung is that. Jung was for me like a really honest exploration of the human mind, starting from his own human mind. And his own human mind was a mind that at a certain point was really disorganized. Um, and that's what interested me in the book, in the Red Book. So Jung, um, to to be short about it, Jung had psychotic experiences after his breakup with Freud. Freud saw in Jung like the one who would continue psychoanalysis. He was not a Jew. He was a psychiatrist. Um, he would fit within the dominant culture. But in the end, they disagreed on fundamental aspects of their theories, like on libido, is it sexual or not? So they disagreed. There was a split between both. And then Jung started having this experiences of derealization, which in my view are psychotic experiences. Um, but what did Jung do? And that's why I find Jung interesting. Jung took it seriously. So he took the surprising experience of the overwhelming things that happened to him. So his unconscious was being manifested. He took it seriously and he wrote about it. He started drawing it. So first in black books, little black books, diaries, and then collect these in his red book, which is something like an almost medieval looking manuscript, very beautiful. And it resembles also very much some of the drawings from the Prinzhorn collection. Um, but then Jung says, like, everything about this theory is in that red book. But here we see, like, in my reading, like an honest attempt to learn something from the paradoxes and the difficulties that he's been living through, and he tries to draw a certain message from it that might be valid for other people, but then it starts still from that experience of of chaos, of not knowing, of having had the problem. And that's for me interesting to, therefore, he started from the real in Lacanian terms, like the inconsistency that at a very specific point in his life was so overwhelming. So the real is there, the real that he was encountering at a certain moment. But when we see the ideological use of Jung, well, for me, that's it's no longer starting from that very point. And so therefore, I'm also, and I don't have any problems at all if some people who have had psychotic experiences think that Jung is very inspiring for them. Um, I think they are right. Jung can be very inspiring in dealing with some of the dilemmas and of the yeah the paradoxes of reality. Um, but I'm not buying his theory. I think his trajectory was very interesting, but his theory, well, I see that it has value for some people, but I don't think it's the most interesting framework within psychoanalysis. I'm more drawn towards the more abstract thinkers like Wilfred Bion or Lacan as more interesting frames of reference to continue with psychoanalysis.
Indeed, indeed, Professor. I mean, I don't know. For me, I still do like reading Jung, but I've come to now read him as just like as almost like a work of fiction. I enjoy the way he writes, his prose is
Yep.
beautiful, like his analogies and whatnot. And if I want to learn about, let's say, if I want a theory of the subject and probably even learn about myself, I would read more Lacanian theory if I want
Yeah.
something more robust in that sense.